We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to be talking about Christian schools. That's something we've been promoting this week, and I think you are going to benefit a great deal with the conversation and the book we're going to be talking about, because if you have children or grandchildren in a Christian school, I think you will benefit from this. If you're a teacher or an administrator, I just think this is a must-read. And if you're one of those individuals that think, maybe we need to have a Christian school in our community, this is the book I think we all wish we had before we set out to try to develop a Christian school. It has the title, Let's Get Real and Make Our Schools Great Again. It is written by Dr. Rodney Haire. He's been on the program with us before, has his bachelor's degree in business administration, a master's degree in counseling, and his doctorate in Christian education. He is responsible for building what today we refer to as Liberty Christian School. As we've talked about it many times, a place where a number of people associated with Point of View have sent their children or grandchildren. And Rodney Haire, it's been a while since we've had you in studio. Great to see you again.
Thank you, Kerby. So good to be here.
Let's see if we can talk about this, because they're just a lot of life lessons. And if people wanted to contact you, first of all, I think they could have you come and speak or do consultations and things like that. We have a link. Just click on the button that says See More and scroll down. Then also, of course, we have a copy of the book. But in some respects, if you think about this, you were maybe different than a lot of people I've met in Christian school, because maybe they would have a person that was a teacher who then eventually became the headmaster. You came out of the business world, and in some respects, many of these very important lessons that you're passing on to us come from your experience of having been in business first and then apply those same principles running a Christian school.
I think, Kerby, it would be very difficult to start a school or run one without a business background. There's so many business principles that helped Liberty get started, and I think without them and without the knowledge that I'd learned the previous 17 years running a textile business, without those in my mind, I don't think Liberty would have ever become what it is today.
Yes. Well, and I think in some respects, I've seen that as well. I met you and I off air, we're talking about some of the boards. My wife will tell you I sit on more boards than any person should sit on, but some of them have been for Christian schools and for camps and things like that. And I remember one person saying, well, I was going to get an MBA so I could take a class in accounting. And I was looking at him going, I took accounting before I even thought about going into ministry, because I thought how important it would be to be able to read a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And you certainly knew a lot about sales and marketing, and anybody that begins to start a Christian school has to realize right away, first of all, you're in the people business.
Yep.
You're hiring, firing people. You've had experience there.
Yep.
You're dealing with a board, and boy, do you have some stories about boards in here, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But then you're also in the money business, the fundraising business, and so if you don't have a background in sales or casting a vision, that's going to be key to some of the success of some of these Christian schools. And you've seen some come and go, and here, look at how Liberty Christian Academy and Liberty Christian School has really become a very significant institution, in large part because of the kinds of things you built in terms of some of those systems.
Yeah, I had no idea. When I started Liberty, I didn't know that fundraising was part of it. I was just shocked. I thought you paid tuition and that covered everything. But if you want to build a gym or buy a football field or build a science or computer lab, and you don't raise money, it'll never happen. And I don't know. I just never thought about it. And I came from a public school. My sister and I we were talking earlier, we went to the Addison School on Beltline Road.
Right there. I know where it is.
Then I went to Hillcrest and then University of Texas. I mean, we went to public schools because my parents had just enough money. And the thought of a private school was never a conversation in my home. And frankly, Judy and my wife and I never thought our kids would go to a would go to a Christian school or a private school. It wasn't until I experienced a terrible situation in a public school with my daughter that we felt like, well, we just got to go. We've got to do something. And so Liberty. So our first thing we did was enroll them in a Christian school in Dallas. And so we commuted from Argyle to Dallas. It was far north Dallas, luckily. And then that school was not really what we thought. I mean, we wanted a school where they offered all of the selections. We wanted athletics, we wanted fine arts, we wanted the academics, of course, and it was limited in all of those divisions. And so I thought, well, if you want to do it right, you do it yourself. And so I started Liberty, never having thought I would be the headmaster or that would stay, for that matter. So I kept the company and started the school all the time, thinking, I'm sure we'll have a headmaster one day. I wonder when that's going to be. And then, lo and behold, I was it, and it just, I sort of grew into the position. Really.
One of the things I thought I might just mention just for our listeners, and I'll show this picture for those that watch online, is a picture of you and Marlon Maddox.
Yeah.
And we have mentioned you sometimes in terms of just the fact that there was if nothing else, a reaffirmation for why you were doing what you were doing, because you and especially your wife were listening to Marlon Maddox back in those days.
Every day. I'd go to work when we found out Marlon was on the radio and Point of View, and I would come home from work and she would tell me what she learned from Marlon that day. And so when we started Liberty, I didn't tie the two together. I was just so busy with hiring teachers and buying desks and bookshelves and things. It never did occur to me that what Marlon was really talking about, I was doing. And so Marlon called one day to enroll his grandchildren in Liberty, and I really thought Judy was kidding. She said, Marlon Maddox is on the phone. And I thought, no, And so sure enough, and he said, I'd like to meet with you and talk to you about my grandkids.
Yes.
And that was a great experience. We got to know Warren and Marla and their children. What a great family that is. And then Mary and Marlon became really wonderful friends.
We're talking about the book, Let's Get Real and Make Our Schools Great Again. And so we're going to kind of take you through some of the kinds of issues that you need to think about. And if you're on the receiving side of that, maybe what to look for in a Christian school. If you're on the building side of that, what maybe is something that your Christian school might want to focus on, because there is just a lot of road war. Well, as I going through this, a lot of road wear, because you have actually learned a lot of the life lessons, not vicariously, but experientially, I guess is a nice way to say that. And so whether it's putting together a board or the significance of how you hire and fire people, whether or not you want to issue contracts, the importance of, for example, something like football, or how to address some of these board issues that surface, or some of these parents that have certain kinds of demands, I think you're going to learn quite a bit. And of course, a lot of this will be helpful in any ministry you're in, but especially since we are so dedicated to wanting you to consider what you might do to actually consider what might happen for your own children and grandchildren, whether you are in the public schools, Christian schools, homeschool. I think always parents are responsible for the education of their children and dispensing Christian values. But there are some very important lessons I think we're going to learn as we dig into this book. And if you want to join the conversation a little bit later, of course, that number is 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know more, all of that's on the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Trump has accomplished quite a bit in his 6 months, especially when you consider he's had to do that without many of his nominees. As of late July, there are 256 nominations pending in the Senate. To put that in perspective, only 86 of his nominees have been confirmed. Not one U.S. attorney has been confirmed at that time. The confirmation process is taking too long due to many factors. I suggest it may be time to reconsider the process of recess nominations. This is another case of Harry Reid ruling from the grave. In the last few months, we have seen the parliamentarian he chose deciding what elements could be in the Republican budget bill, His influence is also being felt when it comes to nominees. The Harry Reid nominee blockade began in 2007 when he wanted to prevent President George W. Bush from using recess appointments. As Senate Majority Leader, he decreed that the Senate was never formally in recess. This prevented the president from appointing federal officers who can start serving immediately. The Constitution states that the president shall have power to fill all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate. In the past, that was necessary because of the long distances of travel. There were times when Congress was not in session. But now the Congress is moving at a glacial pace. It is reasonable to acknowledge that Congress is not in session so that a president can put someone in a position. These appointments can only last until the congressional session ends. If the president made a bad choice, senators could begin a formal investigation of someone who is recess appointed. It is time to acknowledge when Congress isn't in session and allow a sitting president to fill significant vacancies in the government. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Rodney Haire as we talk about his book on Christian education. And I thought, Rodney, for just a minute, we might talk about the fact that one of your chapters talks about a rebirth. And that's because, in a sense, your school started in a small church, and then it became Liberty Christian Academy. But talking about that would be helpful because there are listeners right now that are saying, we might want to start a Christian school in our church, but there are all sorts of things you have to start thinking about almost simultaneously in order to launch one of those, right?
Well, the main thing, if you're part of a church, you just got to be sure that the pastor and the board are in agreement that they need and they want very badly to start a Christian school. Mm-hmm. And Liberty Christian School is one of those schools that was blessed with Liberty Church as the founding church.
Right.
And they had it for about 4 years before I stepped in. And they had 20 kids, and it was running the pastor and the deacons crazy because they weren't called. If you're not called to pastor a church, it'll be a very, very tough job. And if you're not called to run a Christian school, it's going to be hard. But the first thing that you've got to do is you've got to make sure that you're in line philosophically with the board and the pastor, and they realize it's going to cost money. And in that field, there's a whole nother section. I don't know if we want to get into it now or not, Kerby, but to start, you've got to be sure you have the proper facility. That if the church wants a school, do you have the restroom facilities? The first church that Judy and I started a school in had a septic system, and it was built for the church that met Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday, and about 100 parishioners. We brought in this Christian school that grew to about 130 by midterm, and the kids were using the toilet every day, and it just flooded the halls all the time. And that, you don't think about everything. So you got to have the right facility, and you've got to have a church that's committed to funding it. And you're going to think about things that, look, I've got a Sunday school teacher that's a public school teacher. What is she going to think? I'm not good enough. And so you've got to be sure that everything is lined up philosophically. And the reason you're starting a school, a Christian school, really is for this, really to save the minds of the children. And if a parent is listening and your children are in a public school, I just want to tell you right now, you really need to be thinking that, because it's going to be a problem.
Well, and the other part that you do point out here is that you get to the point where the school is doing better than the church.
Yeah.
And later on, we're going to be talking about school choice, because right now, school choice is really generating the possibility that there are going to be more and more students that may be wanting to come to a Christian school. So that's when you then begin to see, was this just an idea that the pastor thought he'd do on the side, or does he realize that this may get so big it almost has to disconnect physically from the church, because you're going to be very successful? And I think the future is very bright for Christian education, don't you think?
I do think so. And I think that if you have the right headmaster and he knows how to hire and fire people, and he's you'd want to be sure you don't sign contracts with teachers.
That was the next thing I was going to bring up. Go ahead.
You're gonna make a mistake in the hiring process, and you, as careful as you can, as you're doing it, and as thoughtful, as much thought as you put into this interview, you're just going to make mistakes. And when you do, if you're stuck with 9 months of a contract, you're making kids pay for 9 months of your mistake, and you just don't need to do it. That's a public school philosophy of contracts, and it does not work. I mean, if you're in them, lay that off on the board. The board tells me I can't do any more contracts. Explain that to your staff, and they'll agree. They'll agree. And if the teacher doesn't want to be there, they're going to be unhappy. The students are for sure going to be unhappy, and the parents are. It's just a no-win. It's much better. Hire the teacher you should have hired before you fire them. I've made that mistake and ended up in a bad place. But you want to be sure that you hire the replacement before you do the firing.
And again, that one on no contracts was, again, something I've seen not necessarily implemented the way you have at other Christian schools. And then, like you said, you're stuck with that for a long period of time. And you tell a story of this one art teacher that, it was certainly not a good decision. And so you have those examples that almost always unfold. But let's get to the other part of that, because one of the things you didn't know when you became headmaster was that you are going to be raising funds.
Yes.
And there, as a whole institution, there are people that are trained to be development or advancement people, and I've known many of them at various seminaries and Bible colleges. But if you think that just the tuition is going to be important for all the needs that you have, guess again, because you talk about having not only an annual fundraising event, but then a capital campaign. Can you talk about the differences there?
Yes, and I wish that I mentioned it in the book. I hope. When you are interviewing a family, be sure that you mention that there's an annual campaign, and every family is supposed to and expected to participate. That's a checkbook-sized gift. That's not a deep one, but it's to help you make ends meet. The capital campaign should only be run every 3 to 4 years, and it's for a capital item like land, like a building, a science lab, a biology lab, a football program, an athletic field, a gym. Those are capital campaigns that people want to give to. And you have to, if you can afford them, you need to have a vice president of advancement or someone that is a professional fundraiser. That's ideal. They're hard to find, but you probably are going to have to pirate them from a university if you get a good one. But they should earn about 10 times their salary.
Yes. Well, and again, that's usually what they do. And I've run into some of those at different schools and universities and colleges, Bible colleges, ministries. But again, that's something to think about. That also, when you're talking about the annual campaign, like you said, that's a checkbook. But for the capital campaign, that's more like a stock gift,
yes,
which sort of brings us into something else. And that is, there is a sense in which some individuals that will come and enroll their children or grandchildren in your school will assume that their only obligation is for their kids when they're in the school. And you've said, well, no, you can be giving so that you can help your grandkids get that. And so there's a sense in which you really need to know how to cast a vision for a longer term, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And we had Grandparents' Day, and it was the biggest turnout is going to be for K through 6. They're more involved in their grandchildren at that age. They're new and they have time for grandma and grandpa. And it's more of it's easier to get those folks at the school. But Grandparents' Day are an important part for the headmaster to meet the grandparents and cast a vision at Grandparents' Day only once a year. And don't have it too early, that folks don't like to get up so early. Have a great coffee cake, wonderful juice and coffee, and a wonderful program. Doesn't have to be long, maybe an hour. Then let them go to classes. But you'll gain a lot of contacts at Grandparents' Day that'll surprise you.
Yes.
And so a lot of our larger gifts came from grandparents.
But again, that's one of those things that you need to start thinking about strategically, because sometimes if you're just in there, you're just trying to hire and fire the individuals, trying to make sure that everybody's in class at time, make sure there's discipline, which we'll talk about after the break, and you don't really have this long-term vision. And there's one thing that I know you and other individuals that have been successful in Christian education, they've been able to cast that vision in terms of why Christian education is valuable, why it is important for you to spend money, because you've already spent your tax dollars to help the public schools. Yep. And so some of those ideas of vision are really important. So let's take a break, because I want to give a chance for people to, first of all, find out a little bit more about you. If you go to the website pointofview.net, you're going to see that we have an opportunity for you to click on the link to rodneyhaire.com. Don't even have to know how to spell his last name, because it's all right there. And then, of course, we have this book, which I think you're going to find very helpful, and it's available, as I mentioned just a minute ago, in paperback and Kindle. And so you can go to pointofview.net. But I thought we'll come back and talk a little bit about how do you develop the curriculum, but also the extracurricular ideas. One of the things that came out of this is how important a football program is. I don't think anybody probably has ever thought about that. I've been to Christian schools, sometimes with ACSI and accreditations that do have some and some that do not, and that's different. That also brings us into the whole idea that you have of accreditation. And then we'll get into boards, because the boards are very key there as well. Some people have really benefited from their boards. Some individuals, headmasters, and CEOs end up fighting with their boards. So lots of things that we're still going to talk about. And if you find yourself wanting to get a little bit more information, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. The book is again entitled, Let's Get Real and Make Our Schools Great Again. Dr. Rodney Haire in studio with us. We'll take a break and continue our conversation with him right after this.
Let me ask you something, if I may. Have you been blessed by Point of View? We often hear from listeners about the positive impact that Point of View has in their lives. As one listener told us, Point of View leaves me informed and encouraged. So this may surprise you. Out of all the Point of View's hundreds of thousands of listeners, just 1% supports the program. And yet Point of View relies on listener donations. If every listener gave just $10, Point of View's full ministry and operations would be funded for an entire year. Let me ask you again, have you been blessed by Point of View? I urge you, pay it forward today with a $10 donation so others may be blessed as well. Give online at pointofview.net. Or you can call us and give toll-free 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Dr. Rodney Haire in studio with us, and we've got some calls off air that were just saying, well, where is the school? And it's in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Actually, Argyle, I guess, is where it's located. Right. And I just thought, if nothing else, if anybody is saying, boy, this sounds like a good school, and they happen to be in the Texas area, there's opportunity to actually enroll, even though schools are starting right now.
They are, yeah. I think Liberty Christian School in Argyle starts in a couple of weeks. Maybe no, before then, I forget our time. And I called the headmaster, Blair McCullough, before I came to here, Kerby, and he said they have an openings in 9th and 11th grade.
Oh,
the rest are a wait list. But I would sign up for Liberty Christian if I was looking for a school. At least look and then ask Blair if he's full, where would he send his child?
Yes.
And because there are other selections. And, you know, you pay in a Christian school, you pretty much pay for what you get. I don't know whether Liberty is considered pricey or not, considered the private costs of tuition in universities. But when you start adding a full football program and basketball and baseball and softball, all the sports for women and men, it's expensive. I mean, you have to have a couple of gyms, and you have to have a football field, and we have a turf field. It's softer when kids land. It's easier to maintain for sure. But it's just the more you offer, the more expensive it is. And Liberty's got a full arts program, art and theater. And I think I'm saying these things because as you look at a school and it is inexpensive, you probably are going to be doing without programs. And that may be okay for a start and then work towards getting into a full program. Another example of that is Prestonwood, Trinity Christian of Addison. Both of those schools are excellent. I like Prince of Peace in North Dallas. Those are all good schools. And I think as you get your child, God made your child a certain way, and it's important to know the school that you're coming into meets that child's love. God will tell you the child will tell you how God made him. Just listen to him.
That's right. Well, let's talk about that for just a minute, because I want our listeners, whether they are going to be building a Christian school or not, they probably want to encourage their children and grandchildren to go to a Christian school. And you know, Rodney, only so well that there are some Christian schools, not the ones we've just mentioned, which are really good, but some where they open in prayer and then they just teach it basically as if you were in the public schools. Yeah. And as much as we might appreciate the spiritual emphasis, really what you're about and what these really significant and very successful Christian schools are about are teaching a Christian worldview. And that's important.
Kerby, it is. And like our world history starts with Adam and Eve, and the curriculum is so important. If you don't know anything about starting a school, curriculum is something you have to look into. And I would tell you that Abeka is a publishing house in Florida, Pensacola, and they have a scope and sequence program for kindergarten through 12th. If you start there, you'll be okay. And then as you hire really a great math teacher, they may find a math book that better suits you than Abeka's, but it's a place to start. And I want to mention this about starting a Christian school. It is the most important thing a ministry can do, if it's part of a church or not, independent or with a church. You're going to find that your school is going to reach into the lives of the parents and the grandparents.
Very true.
And they're going to be that they may have come to your school and they said, "Yes, I'm a Christian," and that may mean that they have their letter in a church or their membership in a certain church. But beyond that, Christ is not really a part of the inner workings of their family. But as their children get in the car talking about what they learned in Bible class that day, you're going to see families growing closer and closer to the Lord. And it's the most important thing. It was the biggest surprise I had was that, for instance, I had a third grader who got picked up every day after school by a fiance. The man was a plumber. Woman worked in an office, and she just couldn't get off work to pick her child up at 3:30. Her fiance could. So the thing that they did when the plumber picked up the third grader was that she read to him her Bible verses, because she had to read them to someone and then him sign off that she had read them, that she had read her Bible classes to him, Bible stories to him. And he, after I think it was only about 2 or 3 months, he gave his life to Jesus.
Wow.
Now, I would never have thought that, but when you start a Christian school, you can expect things are going to reach into the family dynamic in ways you can't even imagine. And that's just the Holy Spirit at work.
Well, again, you mentioned Dr. Horton. Of course, we talked about Rebecca, and so a lot of the curricula. But I thought for just a minute, let's talk about what's outside, because you wanted to not only have, of course, a fine arts program, but also one of the things I learned from your book is how important a football program is, because the football program creates everything else. We're talking about drill team and cheerleading and all the rest, and it doesn't seem like something that a Christian school would want to implement, but you found, especially since you're broadcasting here from the state of Texas, that is really important, and it spawns all sorts of other ministries inside the school.
It does. And I would tell you that until you have a football program, you'll never have an athletic program. And if you don't have an athletic program, your school is never going to grow. I mean, it sounds bad on your ears to hear that, but I'm just telling you the truth. And your football coach needs to be a godly man. Our football program was birthed and developed by Mark Bowles, and he handed it off to another man who was godly, and he had trained him. And now Jason Witten is our head football coach, and he is not only he's a great coach and a great player, but he models for those boys the kind of man you want to be. And that is so important, and it's going to drive parents to get involved. They're going to be at Friday night games. They're going to show up at practice. They'll be involved, and the cheerleaders and the drill teams and the bands. Everything is spawned, but the band's not going to ever be a band unless they've got a place to play. And every Friday night is a great place for a band, and it just you'll just not develop properly as a school without a football program. And I just did a consulting job not far from Dallas with a school that is just locked in. They've got about 150 kids, and they've had that for years. And I said, "Where's your athletic program?" "Well, we don't have one yet. We're working on that." You just bite the bullet and do it.
Yes. Well, again, some of that comes from the fundraising that you just talked about a minute ago. And again, if somebody says Jason Witten, that sounds familiar. Well, that was a Dallas Cowboys star. And to have a person of that caliber, sometimes what you have found is whether it's a teacher that's been in the public schools for many years, who's maybe even a master teacher, you say, why would he or she come over to the Christian schools? Because I love the environment there, and I really appreciate the fact that the kids are there to learn. How is it I would get somebody that is a professional athlete come and be willing to coach? And that is, in some respects, the ministry that the school has, even in the lives of some of the people that are the teachers, administrators, and coaches.
Yeah, you people are going to retire, Kerby. And when they do, they need a place to go. And Jason wasn't finished playing football, and so this gave him a chance. Not to mention, he's got 2 sons that are at Liberty, and one of them has graduated this year. The other one's coming up. They're outstanding boys and outstanding athletes, and he gets to hang out with his sons and teach them how to really play the game. And all the other parents are benefiting from it. But they're probably, we've got a school of 1,250 kids. 500 of them are in high school. Roughly, and half of those are boys. It's about half and half, but we've got about 100 kids in the football program and the JV programs in middle school. It's a great place to build a school, the heart of it, and the money is important, and they'll pay for themselves, but you've got to make the investment, no doubt about that.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about boards, because indeed that is something, and you probably spend more time talking about board members simply because they can make or break you, and you actually turned in a resignation, although they didn't accept it, and that turned out very well. Also got a great picture here of you and your kids and everybody, and just, again, an understanding that this was a ministry not only that you were having for others, but for you as well. And isn't it interesting, as we'll be talking about next hour when we get into this whole issue of education and Christian schools and school of choice, how many times you have teachers in the public schools who then put their kids in the Christian schools, or teachers in the public schools that don't even have them in the same public school where they're teaching. That is very rare in the Christian school movement. They will be in the same school with their kids, and the kids will be in the same school with the teachers, and that tells you a lot about those as well. So if you've been looking for some information, maybe to make a wise choice about a Christian school, I think this book would be helpful. But if you're going to start a Christian school or actually involved in one right now, I think this is a must-read. We'll take a break and continue our conversation with Dr. Rodney Haire right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. We have in studio with us Dr. Rodney Haire, and I thought I'd end by just talking about boards, because after all, every Christian ministry, every Christian school needs to have a board. I understand that. But one of the things you wisely did early on, in addition to not issuing contracts for the teachers, is also said that the headmaster would be the chairman of the board. I've been to schools where the headmaster is hired by the board, and you almost immediately don't have any authority. And that's exactly why you did what you did. Can you explain that?
Well, I think that a board, one of their jobs is to make sure that the headmaster is in place. So if a headmaster retires, the board is the one that finds the replacement. But here's the issue, is that the board needs to find a headmaster for the school that can actually chair the board. He has that leadership ability. He's got the knowledge of the education ability, and he's got enough sense to hire and fire the right people. And the fact that he becomes your chair and headmaster is an important dual role for a school to remain healthy. Average school has a turnover of headmaster every 2.5, 3 years. And that is just not right. If the headmaster is the chair, he can make decisions. He has authority. When he raises money, people have a feeling that they're giving they know what they're giving to, and the teachers have a new respect for him. So it's just, Kerby, it's just critical that the chair of the board and the headmaster are the same person. A for-profit company would never have a chairman of the for-profit company that was not the CEO. They make decisions all day long. Average headmaster makes 62 decisions a day. And if he's not the head, he's always looking over his shoulder. Am I going to make the wrong board member mad? The board's job is not to run the school. It's to help the headmaster run the school and be of any service he can. But the main job for a board is to make sure that you've got a headmaster in charge, and next is to raise money.
Yes.
And
which gets to the other part, and that is when you bring people on the board, they need to understand that part of their responsibility is helping with fundraising.
Yes, it is this adage is that you give, get, or get off. If you can't afford to raise money, a lot of great board members don't have the cash, but they have the influence. And so it's just important that they realize that their job is to be a supportive of the headmaster, to be a great advocate for the school, and to raise or give money.
And again, let me mention that because I find myself on some of the boards, and when they say give, I say, well, maybe I can't give, but I can get. In other words, lots of times the requirement is you can give this amount or you can help raise this amount. And so in some respects, you can recognize that you're not always looking for the individual who is the bank president or the individual that is working in the stock market and only can give you a few hours a week as a board. You're also looking for some people that have great influence and have a lot of connections, and networking is going to be important as well. Yeah. So, again, those are some key issues. And, again, back to headmasters, we've had Larry Taylor on this program, and we've talked about now, of course, he's with ACSI. Yep. Judy Capehart and all sorts of people like that we've had on this program over the years. That is a pressure position anyway, and if you don't have clear lines of authority, and like you said, every time you make a decision, you're wondering if you're going to have an emergency meeting to actually counteract something that you've done, then people are going to get terribly confused. And so, again, you can learn some of the best practices from taking this book. But in the few minutes we have remaining, are there some other things we might mention? Because one of the things I got from just even fundraising is sometimes when we have a shortfall, instead of saying, we're going to gather everybody out here and we're going to sell candy, maybe it would be just better to just add another $5 or $50 to every student instead of all these peripheral fundraising campaigns that never really are very helpful. Yeah,
I that's right, Kerby. And I had in the book, I've got a paragraph that and I've said it in the first few pages. Stop right now and add this to your handbook. And it's a paragraph that says to the families, essentially, we are going to make some errors. There are going to be some surprise expenses in running the school, just like they are at running your home. And when we have those, we can't send your children home selling, wrapping paper or candy or light bulbs. We're just going to divide the costs that we have by the number of kids we have, and you'll get an assessment. And I remember one year, I did the worst year ever for expenses. I had 8 assessments. They were $20, $25 a child, but I had no complaints because they were just so happy they didn't have to call on their friends or themselves write a check for all the light bulbs or whatever, Yeah. And so that paragraph in your handbook gets you out of the immediate need for funds that we all have. Whether it's a school or a family.
I love this. Get out of the emergency white knuckle fundraising. Yeah. And like I said, 8 assessments in 1 year and you still didn't get any complaints. So in some respects, talk about how people can use this because, first of all, you talked about the fact that you have done some consulting. So people might want to click on the picture that we have of you there. And as they do so, they can find out all sorts of things in terms of your publication services, your credentials, your contact information. Maybe they'd have you come and speak. But also, of course, we have the book, and you've really written this so that whether you're on the outside looking into the Christian schools or whether you're in the Christian school and up to your eyebrows in activities, it does seem to me that you've really helped us understand a little bit more about what we need to develop. And I'll just make my claim right now, and you'll see this next hour when we start talking about this idea of school choice. I think we're going to have more and more kids wanting to come to the Christian schools, more and more parents wanting to come to the Christian schools. We're going to have to build some new ones, and we have to make sure that the ones we have right now are using best practices, and that's really what your book is about.
Kerby, my idea when I wrote the book was to keep schools that have a need, a financial need, a personnel need, a board need. I want them to not have to call me. They don't really have money for a consultant, and if in the book, it's got the best practices the stories are just my own personal experiences of how important it is to raise money and how do you raise a capital campaign is different than an annual campaign. One is the capital campaign is that when you need land, you just need land, and an annual campaign is not going to get it. So that's the purpose of a capital campaign, and you need every family to pull the horse. It's a big one, you know.
Well, I just want to thank you and Judy and everyone who's been involved in this process. And I know that if I had some of the individuals here that have been associated over the years with Point of View, they would come and say they have an incredible debt of gratitude to the fact that their children or grandchildren have actually gone to Liberty Christian School. So I appreciate the fact that you've been such a loyal servant all these years, and I appreciate the fact that this book, which has about 200 pages, is just chock full of stories and experiences that you've been through, and you really want to pass that on to the next generation. And so thank you for being here today on Point of View.
Thanks, Kerby. I appreciate the invitation.
Let me just mention one last time that we do have some information that you might want to find. First of all, if you go to the website, pointofview.net, of course, we have a link to Rodney Haire, and that will give you all the connection points that you might want to have, and maybe you have a question you might want to ask him. But most importantly, let me point you to this book, because indeed it is about 200 pages, and it has almost 28 chapters in the book that really goes through in some detail what you need to be looking for if you're thinking about a Christian school, what you need to be doing if you're running a Christian school. So I hope you've appreciated that, and you've been listening to Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I really appreciate your program. I don't get to listen to it every day because I have to work, but it's really a blessing to me and to all of us.
Everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
I just appreciate all you guys do. I mean, I learned so much, and it's amazing what you teach that I say to other people, and they look at me like, where did you hear that? So I appreciate you guys. So thank you for all you do.
I just turned your program on, and I want to just let you know how much I appreciate just getting the truth out.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time staying in the subject of education for a few minutes, and I hope you appreciated the conversation with Dr. Rodney Haire last hour. His book, again, is entitled Let's Get Real and Make Our Schools Great Again. It was a great interview, and I hope that you will find some of the material that we communicated helpful and practical. And if you'd like to know more about him, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. We have a link to his website, also a link to the book if you can't find it in your local bookstore, and I think you will benefit from that as well. But let's get into the issue of school choice for a few minutes, and then I do want to make at least one couple of comments about the gerrymandering wars that are being discussed around the country, and then finally we'll push off the most important issue in the news today, and that is the decision by the President of the United States to have a federal takeover of the District of Columbia for the issue of crime. And I want to deal with that in some detail because I've posted just one article that shows maybe some of the hypocrisy about that, but also to get into some of the facts, the figures, and all the rest, because that has caused in some liberal circles a meltdown when the president has done exactly what the president should have done, or even the previous president should have done, but we will get into that in some detail. But the article I've posted here just reminds you that when we talk about this issue of school choice, there has been a little bit of journalistic malpractice. Is that a nice way to say it? And this, by Brittany Bernstein, is entitled The Washington Post Crusade Against School Choice. We're going to use a couple of examples, so our listeners in Arizona certainly will benefit from some of the clarification we're going to provide, and we'll maybe mention one or two other states in that regard as well. And that is that if you were to read the Washington Post, and yesterday I quoted from one of the columnists there, so I'm not down on the Washington Post, but I recognize some of the people that write these news stories have a bias. Hey, we all have a bias, but they have a definite anti-private school bias, and that is Washington Post reported last week. Here's the headline: Public schools are closing in Arizona's school voucher program soars. So the implication is public schools are closing down, and the implication is that's because we have the school voucher program. And, of course, they use the word as so that it doesn't say one has caused the other. But that's the implication that you get from the opening sentence. That's the implication you get from the headline. And I want to, for those of you, at least in the state of Arizona for a minute, and we do have quite a number, mention that let's go to some institutes. One is best known in Arizona called the Goldwater Institute, named for Barry Goldwater, of course. And it pointed out that this attempt to link some of the school closures to the what are called the ESA programs, that's the Empowerment Scholarship Account programs, is disingenuous. They're using a nice word. I could use a stronger, but we'll leave it with that. And that is, again, they say that the Post, the Washington Post, would have readers believe that the declining enrollments that they are talking about there is due to the ESAs, which are causing students to leave the school. Okay, let's get into it in a little more detail, only because I want you to know that if you dig deep enough, you will find the facts. You have 8,500 students that have left this particular district in Phoenix. All but 102 of them left for other reasons. It's only 102 of the 8,500 that left for what is called an ESA, an Empowerment Scholarship Account. So it is, I think, grossly unfair and inaccurate to even imply that the two are related at all. The rest of these individuals and students have enrolled in other public schools, but not Roosevelt Elementary School or the district in Phoenix. And there's a very good reason for that, and it gets back to the flaws in the public school system. Just 10% of the students in this Roosevelt Elementary School District in Phoenix scored proficient in math, only 10%. And 17% scored proficient in reading in the 2024 state tests. So there's a reason why they've left the school district. It's because the students are not performing well. It has nothing to do with school choice. But nevertheless, that is the case. Now, if you were to stop there, you'd say, well, that's just a one-off. But I've written a commentary about the next point in this article, and that is the Washington Post, about a year ago, also said that school segregation is due to school choice as well. And again, we can go through all the details for that, but trying to blame school choice is a rather damning accusation, but it really has to do with the way in which we draw school districts based upon zip codes and the segregation that people voluntarily go into is the reason for most all of that, if you will, segregation, because you go in many places where you feel most comfortable as a parent or as a child. And so again, this idea of racial isolation and all the rest, which this article goes into some detail, again, falsely accuses school choice as the problem. One of the other things I thought I might mention, don't have a lot of listeners in Wyoming, but if you go to the Wall Street Journal today, they're talking about how there is an attempt by the school advocates, the public school advocates, and the teachers' unions to actually bring lawsuits against any particular school choice program. And in the state of Wyoming, they have once again created an ESA. This one's called an Education Savings Account. And the Wyoming Education Association has made it very clear that they don't want families getting access to those dollars because those students may then not stay in the public school system. And I think it is important, as this article points out, that you have various state Supreme Courts in a variety of different states, which have found that indeed the legislature certainly needs to fund public school, but that doesn't preclude funding educational alternatives. And the unions, as this article points out, want to keep control of the schools, and they want to keep the dues money flowing to maintain their political clout. And so in some respects, we're seeing some of these lawsuits that have surfaced. And the one that's in today's issue of the Wall Street Journal is the story about Wyoming. But I think it illustrates again that the school choice crusade is certainly picking up very significant steam. And so that's why you've seen the Washington Post crusade against school choice, simply because they, in many cases, want to represent some of the concerns and some of the arguments being put forward by the teachers' unions for the public schools. So we'll see where that goes. But if nothing else, I thought since we were talking about Christian schools, school choice is doing pretty well, and it's resulted in, I think, false headlines and lawsuits. We'll cover some other very important issues right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
President Trump has accomplished quite a bit in his 6 months, especially when you consider he's had to do that without many of his nominees. As of late July, there are 256 nominations pending in the Senate. To put that in perspective, only 86 of his nominees have been confirmed. Not one U.S. attorney has been confirmed at that time. The confirmation process is taking too long due to many factors. I suggest it may be time to reconsider the process of recess nominations. This is another case of Harry Reid ruling from the grave. In the last few months, we have seen the parliamentarian he chose deciding what elements could be in the Republican budget bill. His influence is also being felt when it comes to nominees. The Harry Reid nominee blockade began in 2007 when he wanted to prevent President George W. Bush from using recess appointments. As Senate Majority Leader, he decreed that the Senate was never formally in recess. This prevented the president from appointing federal officers who can start serving immediately. The Constitution states that the president shall have power to fill all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate. In the past, that was necessary because of the long distances of travel. There were times when Congress was not in session. But now the Congress is moving at a glacial pace. It is reasonable to acknowledge that Congress is not in session so that a president can put someone in a position. These appointments can only last until the congressional session ends. If the president made a bad choice, senators could begin a formal investigation of someone who is recess appointed. It is time to acknowledge when Congress isn't in session and allow a sitting president to fill significant vacancies in the government. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's see if we can talk about what many are calling the gerrymandering war. And maybe that's a little bit of hyperbole, but it illustrates, again, this ongoing battle. This particular piece by David Catron, I think, is a very good piece. And then when we come back after the break, next part of the hour, we'll get into the whole issue of the federal takeover of the District of Columbia. Donald Trump, yesterday, President Trump announced that the D.C. police will now be under federal control and will deploy the National Guard. And if you haven't seen the press conference, that picture there shows the president speaking, and you have the Secretary of Defense, you have the Secretary of Interior, you have the Attorney General, you have the head of the FBI, you have Jeanine Pirro, who is one of the judges, all standing there addressing this issue. And so we'll get into that and spend a little more time on it, because there's all sorts of misstatements and miscommunication that need to be cleared up. And a little of that even comes to this issue of gerrymandering. So this is our second article for you to read today. And first of all, David Catron comes out by saying Texas Democrats remain on the lam, having fled the Lone Star State to avoid a special session of the legislature called by Governor Greg Abbott to deal with the flood relief and redistricting. The argument being made right now by some of the Democrats who say, well, we're fighting, but you don't look like you're fighting when you're fleeing, is, well, if they would change the order and come back and talk about flood relief and a number of other issues, some of which we'll talk about tomorrow, interestingly enough, from Lathan Watts, because he's written an article about this as well, then we'll come back. But again, since when can one member of the Texas legislature, there are 150 representatives in the Texas House. So how can one out of 150 tell the governor when and how to deal with the particular special session? There is a little bit of chutzpah there, you might say, but nevertheless, that's the argument they're making. If you hadn't dealt with redistricting first, we'd probably stay there and address this issue of flood relief. But anyway, we will leave that for another conversation, because David Catron goes on to say, by disregarding their legislative duties to deny the House a quorum, these Democrats have effectively abandoned the victims of the deadly July 4th Kerr County deluge and delayed a redistricting plan that would bring the state's congressional map into compliance with a directive from the U.S. Justice Department to eliminate coalition districts. Again, let me come back to that point. I've made it before, but I know you tend to tune in and tune out. Not everybody gets to listen to the program every day, but this has a link to that actual letter that came from the Justice Department saying that at least 4 congressional districts are out of compliance. Now, again, they put 5 on the list, but again, you can see that it isn't just something that was just made up out of whole cloth. There is a directive that comes from the Justice Department, which has been really poorly reported up until now, and I thought I might mention that as well. Then they go on in this article to mention again how our friends at the Washington Post ran a headline, Texas ignited a gerrymandering war, we will all pay the price. And the implication of that is, as well, once you start gerrymandering in Texas, well, then other states are going to try to gerrymander. And the rest of this piece is a reminder of how much gerrymandering has been taking place and has not been covered by the New York Times, by the Washington Post, by CNN, by MSNBC, or the rest. For example, he says a number of Democrat governors are using the issue to bolster their argument that they are the defenders of democracy. The Massachusetts governor, for example, has said that we're going to redraw her state's congressional map if Texas follows through with its plan. But then, as David Catron reminds us, and we talked about last Friday, that's going to be rather difficult because there are no Republicans in the Commonwealth's House delegation. Then he goes to the state of Illinois, and of course we talked about Governor J.B. Pritzker, and there you do have 3 possible Republican districts, but all the others are Democratic. And so as a result, it's difficult to see that that would be something that could change. Then he moves to New York. And of course, you have the governor there, Kathy Hochul, who in an editorial said, at President Trump's direction, the Texas State House Republicans are attempting to redraw their congressional maps mid-decade, an aggressive power grab designed to flip as many as 5 current Democratic seats. And then she goes on to say, if this, of course, goes on, then this just isn't a Texas issue when Republicans rig congressional maps in one state. It weakens representation in every state. But then, interestingly enough, as David Catron points out, this nonsense is particularly disingenuous, there's that word we've used again, considering that Kathy Hochul has pledged to break more than a mere campaign promise if Texas Republicans go forward with their redistricting plan. As a New York Post headline puts it, hysterical Hochul vowing to flout law to redraw voting maps. So again, you have that one. Gavin Newsom goes on to say the same kind of thing in terms of the fact that they have right now a nonpartisan, not very nonpartisan, but we'll leave it at that, Citizens Redistricting Commission, and it would actually be very difficult to do that. And yet he says we will redo that if indeed there are new circumstances. Of course, there's no new circumstances in California, and would have to, again, require some kind of legal action to even take that apart. So it just illustrates that once you head down this road, and I'm not necessarily endorsing it, but once you head down this road, you're going to have a lot of people complaining and saying, well, then we're going to gerrymander, but the ones making the claim to gerrymander probably don't have a whole lot left to gerrymander. And if nothing else, he ends by reminding us that Governor Abbott has no such legal or procedural hurdles to overcome, as are certainly very significant issues in Massachusetts, Illinois, California, and New York. And if nothing else, he can continue to call an unlimited number of special sessions until this is accomplished. Meanwhile, he points out, in Ohio, the state's redistricting rules require that they actually deal with the district map that has to be redrawn before next year's midterms. So in both Texas and Ohio, there's the possibility that you could have 8 more Republican House seats. And now there's serious discussions in Missouri, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Florida. So the point I'm making is this could go on for some time. We'll continue to cover it. But if nothing else, sometimes we have to at least call out some of the hypocrisy. The idea that, well, if they're going to gerrymander in Texas, we're going to gerrymander in Massachusetts. You already have. Matter of fact, I don't know how you could gerrymander it anymore. And it's so gerrymandered in Illinois, it's hard to even imagine how you could get rid of any one of those 3 remaining seats. But we'll see. Just before we take a break, let me just mention that my commentary today is a very important issue, and that is what I call the nominee blockade. We have 86 nominees to the Trump administration that have been confirmed, but we have 256 nominations which are still pending in the Senate, and not one U.S. attorney has been confirmed when the count was made. Now I think we're up to 1. But you can get to see that this is a significant problem. And in the past, when especially the Senate would then go on vacation in August, there was the process of recess nominations. Don't think it's necessarily what was intended by the framers in the Constitution. That goes back to a time in which people had to travel long distances. But given the fact that these nominations and these confirmations are moving at a glacial pace, slow, and slow, maybe it's time to at least acknowledge that when the U.S. Senate is not in session, that then we could at least have some recess nominations. Because even if you made a mistake, and I don't see too many mistakes being made by this administration, the individual that has a recess nomination only serves during that congressional period. And if indeed there was a mistake, they could fix that very quickly. But we are in a situation where only 86 nominees have been confirmed, and 256, based on the last count, are still waiting for confirmation. Something has to change, and so that's why we posted that particular article for you today. It's my commentary, and if you'd like to pass it on, maybe just to a representative that you know, maybe you have a connection to the senator, and say, when are we going to get this done? We'll be back right after this.
Let me ask you something, if I may. Have you been blessed by Point of View? We often hear from listeners about the positive impact that Point of View has in their lives. As one listener told us, Point of View leaves me informed and encouraged. So this may surprise you. Out of all the Point of View's hundreds of thousands of listeners, just 1% supports the program. And yet Point of View relies on listener donations. If every listener gave just $10, Point of View's full ministry and operations would be funded for an entire year. Let me ask you again, have you been blessed by Point of View? I urge you, pay it forward today with a $10 donation so others may be blessed as well. Give online at pointofview.net. Or you can call us and give toll-free 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, let's, if we can, talk about something that is, as people have pointed out, unprecedented, but certainly seems necessary, and that is the decision that came down from the Trump administration and a press conference where President Trump was there with the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Interior, FBI Director, Attorney General, and others, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute, to say that the D.C. police are under federal control and to deploy the National Guard. And our article that I've posted for you from Matt Vespa talks about the fact that the president announced a total federal takeover that has a link that you can follow after rampant crime from the youths, pervasive depravity from the hobos, and an all-around decay have destroyed the city. He goes on to then say the Democrats tried to claim that crime was going down, but that narrative got nuked from actually a variety of sources, which I'll get to in just a minute, because it turns out that the police in the District of Columbia were cooking the books, and that was exposed last month. But he also points out that almost on cue, people have to express that this is one more example, you've heard it before, of an authoritarian government or a dictator or whatever. CNN's Dana Bash said that really the most violent moment in the District of Columbia was January 6th, which, first of all, is irrelevant to why this is happening. But even if you said, okay, I know you're saying this just to try to link Trump back to January 6th and the riots, which we've talked about a million times before, and you know that there is not the link that she's trying to make, even if you let's accept it, that's all the more reason why you need the National Guard. I mean, it doesn't not make your case. It makes your case rather dramatically. And in a minute, I'm going to go through the facts that don't show up in some of these press stories. But one of those in this article is by Katie Pavlich. I'm going to give you a whole set of them from her in just a minute. But she points out that in 2024, Washington, D.C. had the fourth highest homicide rate in the United States, with a homicide rate that is nearly 6 times higher than New York City. Now think about that. There are people I know who, when they're in New York City, tend to look around because they're always afraid of what could happen, and recognize that, as I've pointed out in previous commentaries, and even quoted from some of the research that has come down from a variety of people that have looked at these facts, that the murder rate is actually decreasing dramatically. And after the first 6 months, if the trend continues, we'll have the lowest murder rate in our history, which is pretty amazing. And John Lott is one of those people that's documented that. So anyway, Katie Pavlich also points out that last month the D.C. police commander was suspended for manipulating the crime data. And one of the other things that was mentioned, which came out from another particular post, was that in the last month alone in Washington, D.C., there have been 14 homicides. So you can see that some of those facts that were spread around about, well, the crime rate is going down. Yes, but the crime rate was so high, it still is just unbelievable, and certainly one that required some kind of intervention, which is why I didn't post this one, but you can certainly find it. Rich Lowry was sort of looking at it from a broader perspective, in which he said, let's face it, at its best, Washington, D.C. is a city of timeless grandeur, of iconic monuments, and world historic centers of power. At its worst, it's a harrowing place where a remorseless 14-year-old could steal your car. And what he's pointing to is an individual that has been a DOJ employee. He has this nickname, which I'm not going to use on the air, Edward Corstein, but he was an individual who was doing what he could to try to help an individual, because as she was actually going through a carjacking, he jumps in. And I think most of us, if you've been out on the news at all, have seen, unfortunately, the brutal beating that he received at the hands of 8 individuals when he intervened to try to actually rescue her. And Donald Trump, as a matter of fact, even mentioned that if D.C. doesn't get its act together and quickly, we'll have no choice but to take federal control of the city and run the city how it should be run, and put criminals on notice that they're not going to get away with it anymore. Well, he made that statement last week and didn't wait any longer, decided to jump in. And again, back to Rich Lowry for just a minute, he was pointing that the metropolitan government of Washington has never been worthy of the seat of government of the greatest, most powerful nation that has ever existed. It has consistently been an embarrassment, and for decades now has tolerated, and worse, even created the conditions for disorderly and dangerous streets. He gives some examples, but the one I'll pick out is the longtime mayor of the district, Marion Barry, and all the things that have happened in the District of Columbia, which is very sad, because if you want to, for example, go to Europe and go to a city which is also the capital, Paris, London, whatever it might be, because that's in a city that is more than just the government city, I think you actually will have a more positive experience. When you go to the District of Columbia, if you stay on the mall, maybe go to the Smithsonian, go to the Museum of the Bible, go to Congress, White House, you're pretty good. But if you just stray off a street or two, you're in a really dangerous part of the country. And that should not be. And so, again, the federal government, he says, has put a financial control board in charge to try to pull the district back, first of all, from financial bankruptcy. But again, the argument that is being made is, well, violent crime has been falling in Washington, D.C. Yes, but as he points out, that's from an unacceptably high level. As of 2024, we just mentioned, it has the 4th highest homicide rate of major U.S. cities and a higher homicide rate than all 50 states. As we've said before, there is a desire on the part of some Democrats to make the District of Columbia a state. And if it was listed as a state right now, it would be the most dangerous state in the country. Does that give you some perspective? But let me give you a couple more facts before we take a break. And these come from Katie Pavlich, because she's taken some time to dig some of these up. First of all, the crime data is so bad that we found out that the D.C. police commander was cooking the books. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. And he was then put under investigation for making changes in the crime statistics. And the Metropolitan Police Department confirmed that Michael Pulliam was placed on paid administrative leave in mid-May. Apparently, there is quite a bit of evidence of falsifying crime data, and as a result, maybe trying to make the district look better than it really was. As we've already pointed out, it has the 4th highest homicide rate, but if you want to look at the rate, it's 27 per 100,000 residents. That makes it, if you really understand it in terms of per 100,000, it makes it 6 times more dangerous than New York City. It's also higher than Atlanta, higher than Chicago, higher than Compton, California. If, as we said, Washington, D.C. were a state, it would have the highest homicide rate of any state in the nation. And again, you can see that there was not so long ago in 2012 a homicide rate that was about half of that. But again, the murder rate, if you want to compare it to countries, we have the murder rate that is higher, 3 times higher than Islamabad, Pakistan, 18 times higher than that of communist-run Havana, Cuba. And there were 29,348 crimes reported in Washington, D.C. last year. Of course, we hope those are accurate. We're not sure. And you can see that there are 3,400 violent offenses, 1,000 assaults with a dangerous weapon, 2,000 robberies, and 5,000 motor vehicle thefts, which, of course, was the one that resulted in that beating that individual who was with Doge actually encountered. And vehicle theft in Washington, D.C. is now more than 3 times higher than the national average. So when you hear people tell you, maybe even in the mainstream media, that, well, the crime rate is going down, yes, it is. But the crime rate is higher than any other state in the country, higher than many cities in the country, and that's why the Trump administration felt like it had to step in. We'll come back and maybe pull just a few quotes from the press conference, and then we'll be done for the day. We'll be back right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, listen, we can for just a minute talk about what happened at the press conference. And again, you may have seen that on the news, but I just thought I'd read a couple of comments. First of all, the president himself said, "I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, squalor, and worse. We're going to take our capital back once again." And he made some arguments, and one of those, which I haven't mentioned, is the murder rate in D.C., he said, was higher than some of the worst places in the world, including Bogota, Colombia. I hadn't mentioned that one before. Now, what's his authority to do so? Well, it turns out that comes under the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. He has the authority to take over the Metropolitan Police Department under this Home Rule Act, which includes a provision that grants him the ability to take over the department when there are special conditions of an emergency nature. As part of the federal takeover, the Attorney General, that would be Pam Bondi, will lead the department, while Terry Cole, who is the new DEA administrator, will be the interim federal commissioner of the department. And this will be a dispatching of federal law enforcement officers. And they're going to go, interestingly enough, first to tourist hotspots, which I think is very good. Even during August, and again, I know more kids are starting to get back to school, there probably won't be as many tourists, but anytime somebody that goes and has a bad experience in the District of Columbia, a bad experience in our nation's capital, they go and tell everybody else, and it's just not good. We should do what we can to make this area of the world safe. So let me just suggest that makes some great sense. And again, they're going to work with the park police. They're going to work with drug enforcement. They're going to work with the FBI. They're going to work with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, even the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs, ICE. So we'll see which groups were involved. But again, one author reminds us again that this has been a hotbed of violent crime, and the goal is to turn this around. Donald Trump has made it very clear that he wanted to bring about a change. But let me now quote from Caroline Leavitt. She is the White House press secretary. She said, "Washington, D.C. is an amazing city, but it has sadly been plagued by violent crime for far too long. President Trump has directed an increased presence of federal law enforcement to protect innocent citizens." And she says, as of Thursday night, there will be no safe harbor for violent criminals in D.C. So let's, if we can, maybe talk about one of the really powerful comments come from Jeanine Pirro. Now, you've seen her on Fox. She has been a New York judge, and she is a new U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. Remember, I mentioned that up until fairly recently, we had not had one U.S. attorney confirmed by the Senate. She's the first. But I thought her perspective as a judge was very helpful. So let me read a rather extensive series of comments she made. She said, for example, if you're 14, 15, 16, or 17 years old, you get coddled as you do in most American cities. She went on to say, none of them came to my office because they're not considered criminals. They go to family court, where the effort is rehabilitation. Referring in this case to what's called the D.C. City Council, she said, the president is right. We've got to stop their coddling. Number one, we've got to lower the age of responsibility to 14. I'm tired of having these kids commit crimes in their crews and gangs in D.C. She goes on to talk about the council then. She says the council has this Youth Incarceration Act, where we had a guy who shot a kid on a bus, not justified, with an illegal gun. You know what the sentence was? Probation. The judge said, go to college. She said, he took an illegal gun. He should be jailed for the illegal gun. Forget about the shooting. You put that on top of the gun. Then what we've got are kids who are out there. They're making fun of all of this, doing carjackings. I can't touch them because they want to protect all of that. And then finally, a couple of other things she made some statements about as well. Youth violence is on the rise, not just in the District of Columbia, but across the country, she said. And I think, and if you think that these kids need to be coddled, they need to be hugged, they need to have consequences, she said, something she stressed. She continued, they need to understand that enough is enough, that we're going to put them in jail or some kind of youth rehabilitation detention facility and not allow the D.C. Council to take cover of these kids. It's time for it to end. She added, that's what the president wants. that's what we're going to do. And again, I've seen some articles here that talk about the number of assaults, the number of carjackings. And again, if you were to make the District of Columbia a separate state, what you would find is it would be the worst state in the union. So for all of the complaining and all of the fear-mongering about this as a dictator trying to take over now the seat of government, it's something that was long overdue, and I want to at least support the president and the people that he is putting in the place to actually make this safe. And I got a feeling that we're going to see a chart in the future, the number of assaults, the number of carjackings, and what happened after this was implemented in the middle of August. And I think we're going to see a remarkable difference. And that's a way to not only keep people who live in the district protected, but also to protect all the tourists that come to the nation's capital as well. Let me mention real quickly that, again, my commentary today is about the nominee blockade, in which we've pointed out that you have 256 nominations, last time I checked, pending. And under Harry Reid in the past, there was a desire to prevent President George W. Bush from using recess appointments. I think those sometimes have been misused. I'll be willing to admit that as well. But what he did, that is Harry Reid did, was basically argue that the United States Senate is never in recess. If the senators are not in Washington, D.C., and they're back in their home districts, so they're out on vacation, you know what? The Senate is in recess, and that seems to me that recess power that is given in the Constitution, it is a power given to the president to fill all vacancies that might happen during the recess of the Senate. This, I think, is something that would at least put people in positions of authority at the moment. And indeed, given the fact that recess appointments only last until the congressional sessions ends, it's not going to do a great deal of damage, but it's a good illustration, once again, of how Harry Reid, many times in this current age, rules from the grave. He was able to certainly have an indirect influence through the parliamentarian who's still there, and in many cases was requiring what could or could not be in the budget bill. Now we see the same thing by stating that the Senate is not in recess. That needs to change, and that's why I wrote my commentary, and it's available for you on the website at pointofview.net. Just before I wind down today, I haven't really talked much about our $10 program, but again, I want to remind you that we are a listener-supported program, and I would encourage you, if you've never given to Point of View, maybe you could chip in $10. You can go to the website, pointofview.net. That's where you're going to find many of these articles and the information about Rodney Haire, and if you click on that button that says Give Now, it'd be just a great way that you could encourage us, and if you've never given, why not start? $10 is not a whole lot. It'd be a great way for you to send some encouragement to us. We would greatly appreciate it. Most importantly, I want to thank Megan for her help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Tomorrow we have Lathan Watts with us as we talk about a variety of different topics right here on Point of View.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up, but we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.